Hello, my name is Henry Keane. We are UATV, and today we'll have a chance to talk to an expert who really knows, someone not only with amazing expertise, but also with the rare ability to clearly explain that expertise to his audience. That is why we love him, Jake Broe. Hello, sir. Thanks for joining.
Hey, Henry. Great to see you again.
Indeed. Well, let's start with Battle of Pokrovsk. Russian tactics and Ukrainian defense, deep state, record significant Russian advance in Pokrovsk. Indeed, are Ukrainian forces encircled or not? Is Ukrainian retreat inevitable or not? And what's going on? And if so, how will this affect the overall front line in Donetsk Oblast, do you think, Jake?
Concerning Pokrovsk, Ukraine for the last 4 years has been trading land for time. And I argue what military in the history of the world has done a better job of trading land for time. If you zoom in far enough, yeah, it looks like the Russians are making daily advances, but you have to zoom out and think about the big picture. What percent of Ukraine's total territory has the Russians taken over the last 1,000 days? And it's about 1%. How many casualties have the Russian military take? How much of their national wealth fund have they squandered over the last 3.5 years?
Right.
Pokrovsk, Zelensky says that the forces in the city, Ukrainian forces, are outnumbered 8-1, but that's the military science. You want to minimize casualties while holding territory and maximize the losses that the invaders are taking. So it's a difficult situation, but honestly, making daily videos about this war for 4 years now, I remember the story of early 2022 when Lysychansk and Severodonetsk was surrounded. The cauldron was collapsing. The Russians were advancing. They were going to have a huge breakthrough. How much farther beyond Severodonetsk and Lysychansk has the Russians gone in the last 3.5 years? The story of early 2023 was Bakhmut. The cauldron was collapsing. The Russians are enclosing. They're going to have a breakthrough. How much farther beyond Bakhmut have they gone in the last 2.5 years? The story of 2024 was Avdiivka. Avdiivka is surrounded. The cauldron is collapsing. The Russians are advancing. They're going to have a breakthrough. How much farther have they gone since taking Avdiivka 1.5 years ago? And it's the next mid-sized town. It's Pokrovsk. So right. Pokrovsk has been the story of 2025. Konstantinivka, the story of 2026. Sloviansk, the story of 2027. Kramatorsk, the story of 2028.
Right.
How much longer can the Russians keep wasting men, wasting material, wasting resources, and wasting time to just take mid-sized town after mid-sized town in one oblast of Ukraine?
Right. Well, how much longer, Jake?
We're going to find out, Henry. Right. This war is going to continue until either Putin is dead or arrested by his own people, or there's a total political, economic collapse of Russia, which is, I think, the only way to make this war end.
That makes two of us. But I'm sure you've heard of it, like putting offered a corridor of sorts for journalists, into the combat zone and temporary ceasefire for 5 or 6 hours for even Ukrainian journalists to come and see that Ukrainian forces are in a dead end, pocketed, surrounded, or whatever, helpless at least. The Ukrainian foreign minister calls it a trick. We all know what happened in Ilovaisk. It's either fake or a setup or both, as we know that Putin and a fair deal are two mutually exclusive concepts. So, what would you say? Yeah, right.
Putin has called for these ceasefires a couple times in the last 2 years, and every time he has done it, it's purely been for rotating Russian troops. If Putin is publicly declaring he wants a ceasefire, it's because he wants to advance his own forces to get into positions to encircle even more without Ukrainians firing on them. So no, Russia doesn't care about the lives of journalists. They deliberately target journalists every day, trying to kill the people reporting the truth of this war. So no, I didn't even report on that in one of my videos because it's not even worth mentioning. It's obviously a Russian trick. They're trying to just rotate and move their own forces without Ukrainians firing on them.
Well, I absolutely agree. And I know about my two colleagues, my dear colleagues, just passed away, were killed, murdered in Kramatorsk by a Russian Lancet drone. So they deliberately did that. I know that. Well, another question. Ukrainian armed forces liberated new territories in Donetsk region. Any strategic significance in that? Can we call it a counteroffensive yet or not?
No, I think these are fire control units. So the Russians, going back 2 months, did go pretty deep, about 10 kilometers in this very straightforward salient, and Ukraine had to respond. They had to send some of their elite units to control and contain. The Russians were then sliced and diced, and they took horrendous casualties. This is near the city of Dobrevilla, north of Pokrovsk. Nothing has been significantly changing on the battlefield in this region, in my opinion, the last 2 months. The Russians have been trying armored columns to have breakthroughs. 29 vehicles were destroyed. This was like 3 or 4 days ago. It's the same thing we've been watching for 4 years in the Donbass region. But no, I don't think anything significantly has been changing that will determine the outcome of this war. Ukraine is just trading a little bit of land for a little bit more time as their own defense production increases and the West gets serious about sanctioning Russia's economy.
Ain't serious.
There's always more we can do. Yes.
Exactly. Right. Well, all right. Well, there are other sorts of sanctions, deep attacks deeper into Russian territory. Just recently, Vasil Malukas confirmed that in the summer 2023, one of 3 Oreshniks destroyed in Kapustin Yar in Russia, and that is deep into Russia if you look at the map. And with recent Ukrainian strikes on Russian refineries and thermal plants all over Russia, caused a drop in oil production, et cetera, it's all good. But how serious do you think is the blow for Putin's war effort and his war chest, just by the way?
Something changed on August 1st, and Ukraine decided we're not going to hold back anymore. I think Donald Trump was saying, don't do these deep strikes into Russia during the peace process. We're trying to get a ceasefire. We're trying to end the war. But even Donald Trump, I think, has given up on the idea of Russia willingly stopping this war under any terms. Russia wants territory. It's not about anything else that Putin says or Lavrov says. So yes, something like 20 different refineries have been struck in the last months by long-range Ukrainian drones. And we're seeing the gas lines, we're seeing the shortages, we're seeing the price hikes. Russians at the pumps are seeing 98 rubles per liter for gasoline. And to an American, $4 a gallon, that doesn't seem crazy. But you have to put it in perspective of what is the monthly salary of an average Russian worker. Exactly. And these are horrendous prices. And when you go after energy, when you go after fuel and shipping costs, that is baked into the price of everything. So if it costs more to ship, and Russia is a very big country and they have to move everything the final distance by truck, yes, this is going to get added to the price of grocery stores and consumer goods, and the prices that Russians pay for everything it's already horrendous in Russia. Double-digit inflation for consecutive years now. It doesn't take very long when you're in the double digits for your money to half in purchasing power very quickly. So Russians feel this. And I think the Kremlin, to a certain extent, is okay with it because they want people struggling economically. So they're more willing to sign contracts to go to Ukraine and fight and die. But no, Ukraine cannot stop. They have to keep going and they have to expand their list of targets. I approve of what Ukraine is deciding to do, finally going after thermal power plants. They went after this dam in Belgorod. If Russia views it as a valid military target in Ukraine, Ukraine has to reciprocate. We can't have asymmetrical warfare. Obviously, there are some things the Russians do and target that Ukraine never would. I don't see any benefit in deliberately targeting apartment buildings or hospitals or schools or purely civilian targets. But if it relates to energy and income that supports the Russian military, Ukraine can't hold back. They have to go for these targets.
Can Russian Federation, do you think, adapt? I understand that the Kremlin and Russia are two different entities. We get that. But can Russian Federation as a whole, as a country, adapt quickly?
They're trying. They're trying to import gasoline and diesel from Kazakhstan and Belarus. I think Russia is trying to export crude oil to China and then have Chinese refineries immediately send it right back. So Russia is an energy giant that makes profits from exporting. When they refine oil products and export them abroad, they get a good price, and then they use those profits to subsidize their own domestic markets. If Russia can't export refined oil products anymore, and this is every kind of refined oil product, the subsidies for their own people are gone. Russians at the pumps and in their own commercial and industrial sectors for lubricants or, benzene or polyethylene or whatever, they're going to have to pay higher prices because the subsidies are gone from their exports. So yes, Russia might find a way, if they pay top dollar, to get the imports they need to stabilize their markets from other countries. But it just makes inflation worse.
It does. What about us? What about Ukrainians? Well, what kind of air defense is needed, you think, for Ukraine to adapt to the recent wave?
I think Zelensky was talking about a deal because he came to DC a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying he was meeting with defense companies here in the United States, and he wants to purchase like 20 Patriot air defense battery systems. This will take more than a decade to accumulate, but that's the scope and size. In the meantime, until all these air defense systems can be built and delivered, Ukraine has to adapt, and they have to find a way. The best solution is going after the drone factories in Russia to stop their production. You can go after the launch sites. You can go after the air crews. But if these drones and missiles are being launched, Ukraine is trying to create their own interceptor drones. This is the Wild Hornets. I saw Zelensky he was in London, and the UK just penned this deal to produce these Octopus interceptor drones. They're going to produce a couple thousand and then just start making as many as Ukraine needs. It's horrendous. This is new technology being invented today. Ukraine is the world leader in drone interceptor technology of long-range enemy drones, and even someday I think they'll try and go for missiles. But there just isn't enough Patriots in existence, or IRIS-Ts or SAM-PTs to meet Ukraine's air security needs. So I'm afraid that, Russia's going to keep getting these successful hits, which is why Ukraine has to go harder on Russia in order to slow them down.
Let's put that high-tech thing aside for a moment, and let me ask you a question. The Ukrainian armed forces say they will maintain positions on the territory of Russia, Kursk. Is that a good decision, Jake? Militarily, politically, does that affect the morale, the morale of Russians in particular? And does that exert any pressure on Putin, you think?
There's a lot in war that is symbolic. And the fact that Ukraine earlier this year was able to punch into Kursk and then hold this territory for several months, that was a big deal. It really shattered the image of invincibility. Russia wants to look tough. They want to look strong. So Ukraine is constantly doing symbolic things that are not going to win the war for them, but it does shatter this image of invincibility. I can notice it on social media. I think since especially the election of Donald Trump, there's been a huge drop-off in support for Russia. Obviously, the propaganda accounts that get their checks from the Kremlin, they're going to keep blasting nonsense and disinformation every day. But to the average person, the average user, they are very confused. Why hasn't Russia won this war? Joe Biden left office in January. Trump's been in for 10 months. He shut down USAID. He cut funding for Radio Free Europe, Voice of America. He ended all direct military aid, even though he's still selling weapons to Europeans and those weapons are being delivered. If you go back in time, the narrative was the deep state or the decadent West will abandon their support for Ukraine, and then the Russians will overtake Ukrainians on the front lines in 3 to 6 months. Putin will be in Kyiv by Christmas. That was the narrative being sold at the end of 2024. And they still haven't taken Pokrovsk 10 months later. Going into Kursk, blowing up that Orshnik missile, there's a lot of things that Ukraine does just to make Putin look weak. And I argue he definitely does. I know the ruling elite of Moscow, the inner circle, the upper echelons of Russian society, they know things are bad. They know they are not decisively going to win this war anytime soon. And they're panicking. They're panicking about their own financial future and the lives of their children. If Putin commits to, I don't know how much longer, of war.
Right.
War with Ukraine, war in the Caucasus, war in the Baltics, a direct confrontation with NATO. Putin isn't going to be with us much longer. He's an elderly man. He's gambling it all to get the Soviet Empire back. And I think for younger Russians, they're greatly concerned. And going into Kursk and other things like that, those are the symbolic acts that they need to internalize to fully understand that they're not the mighty, second most powerful military in the world that Putin has been selling to the Russian people for 20 years.
Russia might not be, but what about China? I mean, China supplies 3 million engines for these Shahed drones. How does this change the balance in the drone war, for example, for instance? And should the West respond with sanctions against Beijing, or there should be no response?
I don't think the world understands what China really wants or is planning. I do think China has really appreciated that this war has been a distraction. China can do their own operations in South America, Africa, Southeast Asia, wherever. They basically have taken over Central Asia as their sphere of influence. They've ejected the Russians because the Russians are distracted in Ukraine. So China has been I think the biggest winner from this war dragging out for 4 years.
Absolutely.
They can dictate their terms and prices to the Russians to pay the lowest dollar. Anytime the Russians need to buy something from China, they rip them off and they charge the maximum amounts. When your customer is desperate, you can bend them over. And that's what the Chinese have been doing to the Russians for 4 years now. And they like that the focus and the attention is not on them, as they definitely are planning their invasion of Taiwan. This, I think, is going to happen at some point in the next 2 years.
Right.
This is not going to be a good development for the world. I hope that we can find a way to persuade or deter China, because I think a lot of people will die if this happens. But the weaker Russia gets, the more they just become, a junior partner, a vassal state of the Chinese.
Right.
And I think at this point, Putin's even okay with that, as long as he can still get a win and stay in power himself.
All right, let us get back to that high tech on the battlefield. Ukrainian armed forces and innovations like Mahan electronic defense system that reaches about 150 meters. It is capable against the FPVs, or the unmanned tactical drone fighter FAV-1, if I'm not mistaken, that presented recently in the Philippines. And any of that is a game changer to you?
Just one single system isn't going to change the course of the war, but Ukraine is in this unique situation where they are getting funding from European partners to develop their own new technology. Ukraine isn't going to get what they need from the Western partners because the inventories just aren't there, or especially with the United States, we have our own defense requirements, minimal levels. You can argue the United States is preparing for war with China right now. So yes, Ukraine is having to find a way to invent new technologies for the lowest cost possible so you can produce more units. And with every single one, maybe it works great in one situation or it's not applicable to another. It doesn't matter. Ukraine has to find a way. And this is Ukraine's strength, in that they can take risks and they can experiment and they can challenge themselves to come up with solutions that don't exist in any NATO arsenal. This is going to greatly benefit Ukraine once the war is over, because every other Western partner is going to want their technology, their instructors, their operations teams to train NATO partners. We're already seeing some of these deals being signed, but Ukraine's defense production factories are going to continue producing a lot once the war is over, because there will be buyers. And this will be a huge plus for the Ukrainian economy once the Russians are defeated.
What about nuclear weapons? Putin tests his nuclear-powered Poseidon Sea drone, whatever that means. Trump calls for U.S. nuclear tests just as well. What is that? An irresponsible saber rattling, maybe, or not? What would you do as United States President, Jake, if you informed that China and Russia are testing their nuclear hammers, waving them all over the place? What would you do?
My job in the Air Force was a nuclear missile operations officer, so I've spent a lot of time thinking about nuclear weapons. And the tweet that my president sent out yesterday was insane. incredibly irresponsible. And even the Kremlin was shocked at what Trump said, and Peskov tried to clarify. This infinite flying cruise missile that was tested 4 days ago, there was no detonation. There was no nuclear weapon going off. This is a weapons capability test for a nuclear delivery system, but nobody is testing nukes. The same thing with this underground Poseidon torpedo that Russia says they successfully tested, but I don't believe anything the Russians say. So when Russia's military is struggling on the battlefield, Putin's security blanket, his comfort, is to talk about his nuclear weapons.
Right.
I saw this clip of Putin visiting wounded soldiers in the hospital, and of course, all these soldiers, they were all actors.
Right.
But this is a war that Putin started, and all of these people have lost limbs or have taken bullets to serve him in his war. And the only thing he wanted to talk about was his wonder weapons. You know, this Poseidon missile and this infinite flying cruise missile or whatever. I don't think Trump actually understands, but we ended nuclear testing with a series of treaties, but the entire world agreed. We had all the information and data we needed. There's no reason to test nuclear weapons anymore. The United States did over 1,000 tests over 50 years, and we share that data because we don't want any other nation conducting nuclear tests. So the last nuclear test by the Russians was in 1990. The last test by the United States was 1992. The last test by China was 1996. If this moratorium goes away and we all start testing again, we're just irradiating our planets. You know, this gets into the groundwater. This gets into when you set off a nuclear weapon, the radiation, I would pray there wouldn't be any above ground tests, but even underground tests are not good for the planet. And the nation that would benefit the most with this moratorium going away is China, because China conducted the fewest tests prior to the ban, and they would love to start testing again, and that would not be in America's best interest. So I'm hoping there are so many things that Donald Trump tweets out, and then we all just kind of forget about it 2 weeks later. I hope this is one of those tweets.
Okay, but I mean, I agree with you, Jake, don't get me wrong, but Russians on state TV calling to, for example, to sing the USS Gerald Ford, it's a rhetoric for a domestic audience. What is that? Yes, it is. But was that committing by the American side in any way?
I don't understand why Solovyov and all these propagandists on Kremlin state TV get away with saying this kind of stuff. Like, this should be outraging MAGA. This should be outraging J.D. Vance and Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump when nothing is said on Kremlin state TV without the approval of the Kremlin. You don't have freedom of speech in Russia, let alone freedom of speech on national television in Russia. So when Solovyov says we need to nuke the Gerald Ford aircraft carrier and the supergroup that goes with it, he is threatening to kill thousands of American sailors. He even said in the broadcast we should be smuggling weapons into Venezuela so that if the United States attacks Venezuela, this will kill more American soldiers. I don't know why this is not front page news here in the United States, a top story, why my president doesn't talk about it. I mean, this is a conundrum for me, why Kremlin state TV can daily threaten to kill Americans, and I get no reaction, no response from MAGA or my government. I'm going to keep sharing these clips and talking about them in my videos, but this is just one of those domains where I feel like I'm screaming into the void.
Well, it is a big conundrum for me too. I don't know, but I know that Donald Trump is not watching Russian propaganda, but someone is, and someone maybe finally he will take a look at your channel. I said, oh my God.
It was interesting. There was this report when Zelensky and Trump met in New York City. This was like 2 or 3 months ago. Zelensky showed clips to Trump of Solovyov making fun of him. And then the reports are that Solovyov was told by the Kremlin, don't make fun of Trump on TV, because if he sees that, he gets upset. But yeah, I'm convinced that nobody sees these clips because nobody in the bubble, the White House inner circle, shows them to the president or anyone in his chain of command.
It's not all about only Trump now. I mean, it's USS Gerald Ford. Oh my God. I mean, right. Anyway, thank you so very much. I hope Donald Trump will again take a look into your channel, and that will be in the headlines all over the place in America after that. So thank you so very much for your time and expertise, and for your firm stance looking into this war and helping people all over the planet understand what is going on.
Thanks for having me back on, Henry.
Thank you.
Subscribe to The Gaze and stay updated on the most important events, top news from Ukrainian all over the world, in-depth analysis, exclusive reports and interviews, all on hand in our channel. Join our community of viewers and stay tuned.